The morning the great house buried its master. The rain held off until the gravediggers were done, and then it came down upon Caradon Place. Tamsin Brisley stood at the back of the long library with her gloved hands folded and a sealed paper in the crook of her arm, and she understood, before a single word had been spoken, that she had been called into the room to be used. They had not set her down. The family took the chairs, the widow took the great carved seat nearest the fire, her black bombazine catching the candlelight, her rings heavy on fingers that did not tremble. The daughter sat at her right hand with her chin lifted and her mouth composed into the small fixed shape of a woman who has been told all her life that the room belongs to her. The solicitor stood by the window with a leather case under his arm, and the patient stillness of a man who has already counted his winnings. And in the doorway where the firelight did not quite reach, stood the steward in his plain dark coat hat, in his two hands asked to wait, and told nothing. Tamsin had been governess at Caradon Place for 2 years and 1 month. She knew the house the way a servant knows a house, which is to say better than its owners did. She knew which stair complained, which window would not seat itself in an east wind, which clock ran 4 minutes fast, and had run 4 minutes fast since the old man stopped winding it himself. She knew, too, that a governess is furniture with a memory, and that the safest thing such a woman can do is be very still and see nothing. She had not expected to be handed the will. The solicitor crossed the carpet and held the document out to her, and the room turned its attention to her all at once, the way a field of grass turns under a sudden wind. "You read a fair hand and a clear voice, Miss Brisley," he said. "Lady Caradon wishes the late baronet's testament read aloud, that there be no question of any party's understanding. You are disinterested. You will read it." Disinterested. She heard the word for what it was. She was the one person in that room who could gain nothing and lose nothing. The one mouth that could be trusted to carry the verdict, because the verdict could not touch her. They had chosen her precisely because she did not matter. She took the paper. The seal was already broken. That was the first thing wrong, and she noticed it the way she noticed the 4-minute clock, without yet knowing it would matter. To the household at Caradon Place, Tamsin Brisley had long since been decided upon. "She is the governess, nothing more," Lady Caradon had said of her once, in the corridor, not troubling to lower her voice. "A respectable nobody we keep for the child's French." The words had not been meant cruelly. That was the thing about the widow. She did not hate Tamsin. She had simply weighed her on the one scale she owned, the scale of rank and fortune and connection, and found her beneath notice, and never thought of her again. It is a particular loneliness to be measured and dismissed by someone who does not even remember doing it. So she had been at Caradon Place 2 years, teaching the late baronet's young ward her letters and her sums and the names of the rivers of England, and she had loved the child, and she had kept her place, and she had folded her own history small enough to fit inside a governess's trunk. There had been another life before. There had been a parsonage in a green valley, and a father who read Latin aloud at the supper table, and a small competence that was meant to keep her, and a cousin who had been entrusted with it and had spent it. She did not speak of these things. She had learned that a poor gentlewoman's history is only an invitation to pity, and pity was a coin she would not be paid in. Stay with me through this room, for what happens in it will turn 3 times before the fire burns down. And the woman they chose because she did not matter is the only one who will be telling you the truth. She unfolded the will. She found the place. She began to read. The early bequests fell as everyone in the room expected, and the room relaxed by degrees, the way a held breath leaves the body, a sum to the parish for the poor. The contents of the cellar to an old friend in Exeter, the mayor called Juno to the master of hounds, with a line that said she was to be ridden gently, where she had carried a good man 20 years and had earned her grass. Tamsin read each phrase plainly, letting the old baronet's voice come through her own, and she felt the strange tenderness of it, that a dead man's last wishes should pass into the world through the throat of a woman he had scarcely spoken to. Then she reached the estate. She read the words once silently before she read them aloud, because she had been taught to do so by her father, who said a reader owes the listener the dignity of not being surprised in front of them. And so she alone, for the space of one heartbeat, knew what was coming. The estate of Caradon Place, the house and the land and the whole of the unentailed fortune, was not left to the widow. It was not left to her daughter. It was left, in plain and unmistakable language, to the late baronet's nephew, the son of his estranged younger brother, a young man the family had been told for 10 years was dead. She read it aloud. She kept her voice level because that was the only thing she knew how to do. And she watched the room come apart. Lady Caradon did not move at first. The stillness of her was the stillness of stone before it cracks. Then her hand closed slowly on the arm of the carved chair until the rings bit into her own flesh. "Read it again," she said. Tamsin read it again. The same words. There is no mercy in a clear hand and a clear voice. She could not soften what the dead man had set down. The daughter turned to her mother with her composure gone. All at once the fixed small mouth fallen open. "He cannot," Araminta said.
"He would not, Mama. He would not leave it to a dead man."
Her voice climbed at the end, thin as a struck wire. The certainty she had worn her whole life had cracked across the middle, and underneath it was a young woman who had never once been asked to imagine being poor. The solicitor came off the window very smoothly. "There is, of course," he said, "the question of whether this instrument is the operative one." And there it was, the second thing. Wrong laid down on the carpet between them like a glove. He had broken the seal. He had read it before the family. He had known what it said, and he had handed it to the governess anyway, because a governess could be made to read a paper and then be made to misremember it. What Tamsin did not yet know was that the solicitor had a second will in the leather case under his arm, and that he had been hired to produce it at exactly this moment, and that the only thing standing between the widow's people and the whole of Caradon Place was the steadiness of a hand they had chosen for being too small to matter. She looked up from the page and across the room, in the doorway where the firelight did not reach. The steward had not moved at all. His name was Stephen Maddox, and he had come to Caradon Place 11 months before, hired to set right an estate that the old baronet, in his last illness, had let drift. He was perhaps 32, tall and spare, with the kind of face that gives nothing away because it is practiced not giving anything away. Dark hair, cut without vanity. A jaw that held still under provocation the way carved stone holds still under rain. Eyes the gray of a slate roof after weather. The servants had decided he was cold. The widow had decided he was useful, and beneath her notice, which were, in her arithmetic, nearly the same thing. Tamsin had decided nothing about him at all, because she made it her practice to decide nothing about men who outranked her, and a steward outranked a governess by the small, cruel margin that mattered most in a great house. Yet she had noticed things. She noticed things the way the clock kept time. Without meaning to. She had noticed that he walked the home farm at dawn before anyone was awake to see him perform diligence, which meant the diligence was not performance. She had noticed that he had learned the name of every tenant and every tenant's children, and the particular trouble of every cottage, and that he carried these names without a ledger, in his head the way a man carries the names of people he intends to be answerable to for a long time. She had noticed that he was kind to the old mare Juno, who would now be ridden gently. And once, only once, she had come upon him in the long gallery standing before the portrait of the late baronet's younger brother, the estranged one, the dead one, and she had seen on his guarded face an expression she had no name for, and he had heard her step, and the expression had closed like a door, and he had said, "Good evening, Miss Brisley," in a voice level as a ruled line, and walked away. She had thought nothing of it then. She thought a great deal of it now. The solicitor opened his leather case. He did it with the unhurried confidence of a man who has done this before in other houses, over other dead men, and has always been paid. He drew out a second document, heavier, more elaborately sealed, and he laid it upon the table where the candle stood. The late baronet, he said, of sound mind in his final month, and grieved by the long estrangement that had divided his family, made a later testament. I drew it myself. It supersedes the paper Miss Brisley holds. He turned smooth as oil on water to the widow. It leaves Caradon Place, in its entirety, to his beloved wife. Lady Caradon let out a breath that was almost a laugh. The color came back into Araminta's face. And Tamsin, standing with the first will still open in her hands, felt the whole room read aside its future in the space of 3 seconds, felt the verdict reverse and settle, felt herself become furniture again now that she had done the small task furniture is kept for. She looked down at the second will upon the table. She did not pick it up. She had not been invited to. Yet she had 2 years of the old baronet's hand in her memory. 2 years of the notes he left for the child's lessons, the inscriptions in the books he gave the girl on her name day, the shaky signature on the half-quarter's wages he had once, in a fit of gruff fondness, pressed into Tamsin's own hand with a word about her father's people being good people. She knew his hand the way she knew the 4-minute clock. And the signature on the second will, bold and steady and beautifully formed, was the signature of a well man. It was not the signature of a man in his final month, whose name on his own wage book had wandered like a thing blown across ice. She did not say so. Not yet. A governess who calls a solicitor a forger in a roomful of her betters is a governess turned out into the rain without a character. She closed her mouth on the knowledge and felt it sit in her chest like a swallowed stone. The steward spoke for the first time. "May I see it?" he said. It was not a question. He crossed the carpet without waiting for leave, and the room, which had been prepared to ignore a steward, found that it could not, because there was something in the plainness of him that did not ask permission of furniture. He looked down at the second will. He did not touch it. "This is dated the 3rd of October, he said, his voice level. Sir Bertram took to his bed on the 29th of September and did not leave it. He could not hold a spoon by October. Mrs. Yardley fed him with her own hand. Half the household will swear to it. A man may sign a paper from his bed," said the solicitor. "A man may," said Stephen. "This man did not sign this paper from any bed I ever saw him in." He straightened. "I should like the household called, the housekeeper, the valet, the apothecary who attended him." "You forget yourself," said Lady Caradon, and her voice had recovered all its iron. "You are a hired man. You will be paid through the quarter, and you will be gone by Lady Day, and you will not call my household to dispute my husband's wishes in my own drawing-room." And there it was. The dismissal delivered in the public arena of the family's chairs. The same scale that had weighed Tamsin and found her wanting, now weighing the steward and finding him paid for. He inclined his head a fraction, the way a man does who has decided that this is not the ground on which to make his stand, and he stepped back. His slate-gray eyes had gone for one instant to Tamsin, to the first will still open in her hands, and she understood that he had seen her see what she had seen. The family rose. The matter, in their reckoning, was closed. The first will was a curiosity, a dead man's sentiment, superseded and void. The dead nephew was dead. Caradon Place was the widow's. The solicitor gathered his second will back into his case with the care of a man stowing the source of his fee, and the household was sent about its business, and Tamsin was left to fold the first will and surrender it. She surrendered it. She had no power to do otherwise. Still, she had read it, every word. And a thing once read into a clear voice does not unmake itself. That night she could not sleep, and she went down to the schoolroom where the embers still glowed, and she found that she was not alone in being unable to sleep. The child's small French primer lay open on the table where the girl had left it, and beside it, where no steward had any business to be, sat Stephen with the household account book open before him, and a single candle burning. And the look on his face when he saw her was not the closed door of the long gallery. It was something that had not yet decided whether to open. "You knew the hand," he said. He did not pretend not to know what he meant. On the second paper, I watched your face. You knew the hand, and you knew it was wrong. She might have denied it. A wiser woman, a woman more careful of her place, would have denied it and gone back up the cold stair to her cold bed and kept her small, safe situation. Yet she was her father's daughter, and her father had read Latin aloud at the supper table and had taught her that the truth is owed to the listener, and she found she could not give a false coin to the one face in that house that had not looked through her. "It was the signature of a well man," she said. Sir Bertram could not sign his own wage book in September. "I have the last one he signed. The name walks all across the line. The name on that second will does not walk. It marches." She drew a breath. "And the seal on the first will was already broken when it was put into my hands. A solicitor does not break a seal before the family, and then hand the reading to a stranger, unless he wishes the family to believe the stranger broke it." He looked at her for a long moment in the candlelight, and something moved behind the slate gray of his eyes. Some recalibration of the whole arithmetic by which he had ordered the world, and when he spoke, his voice was not level any longer. "I have been in this house 11 months, he said, "learning every field and every fence and every name, and I have been waiting for one honest person to put their finger on the wrong of it. I had begun to think there was no such person under this roof." He closed the account book. "Miss Bresley, I am not the steward." She did not move. "I am Bertram Caradon's nephew," he said. "I am the son of his younger brother who was not estranged from him so much as cheated of him, turned out of this house at 19 on a lie told by people who wanted his portion. My father did not die. He went to the Indies and worked, and did not die for 20 years. And when he died at last it was of a fever and not of any want of love for the brother who had been turned against him. The first will is true. My uncle found me. He wrote to me. He brought me here under another name to see for myself what manner of place I was to inherit, and to see, I think, whether I was a man who could be trusted with the people on it, before he set my name in his testament. And then he sickened faster than either of us reckoned, and he died. And within a week there was a second will I had never heard him speak of, in a hand too steady for the hand I held at the end." The fire ticked. The 4-minute clock, 2 floors above, ran on ahead of the truth. "Then you are the master here," Tamsin said. "I am a man with a true will I cannot prove, and a false will I cannot disprove," he said, "against a widow with a solicitor, and a name, and the whole weight of the house on her side. The first will means nothing without a court, and a court means money I have spent on this estate, and time the widow will use to send the witnesses away to other situations, where no man can call them. By Lady Day, Mrs. Entra, Yardley will be pensioned off to a cottage in Cornwall, and the valet shipped to a cousin in York, and the apothecary persuaded with a fee to remember nothing. She is not a fool. She is doing it already." Here then was the antagonist's true measure, and it was not stupidity. Lady Caradon had not won by accident, and she did not mean to hold by accident. She had a forged will drawn by a practiced hand, and she had the law's slowness on her side, and she had already begun to scatter the witnesses to the 4 winds, before anyone could swear them to a thing. An enemy who only had to wait, and who knew exactly how to make the waiting fatal. "Then we must be faster than Lady Day," Tamsin said, and she heard herself say "we" and did not take it back. She had not meant to enlist. She had meant only to tell one true thing to one honest man, go back to her trunk-sized life. Yet she had spent 2 years being told she was a respectable nobody, and somewhere in the telling she had come to believe a small portion of it, and now a man whose face gave nothing away had looked at her as though her clear voice were the most valuable thing in the house. And she found that she would rather lose her place defending what was true than keep it guarding what was false. They began that night, and they were careful, because the widow was watching, and the solicitor was no fool either. Tamsin's part was the part the household had trained her for without meaning to. She was furniture with a memory. She could go where no gentleman could go. She sat with Mrs. Midgeon, Yardley in the still room over the elderflower cordial, and let the old woman talk, and the old woman, who had fed her master with her own hand through the last weeks of his life, remembered without being asked that he could not have signed his name in October, that his hand shook so he could not lift the cup, that on that very day the false will bore. He had been too far gone even to know the date. Tamsin wrote none of it down. She carried it in her head the way Stephen carried the tenants' names, and she went on smiling and teaching the child her rivers. "You are too curious by half for a governess," Lady Caradon said to her. One morning on the stair, in the public sight of 2 footmen and the daughter, and her voice was pleasant, and her meaning was a knife. "A governess who minds other people's business soon finds she has no business of her own. You are nothing in this house, Miss Brisley. Pray, remember it." The second voicing of the verdict, louder now before witnesses, meant to be carried below stairs, and remembered. Tamsin curtsied and said, "Yes, my lady," and went on. The widow, for her part, had felt the floor shift. She did not know how, and she did not know from where. Yet a woman who has spent her life weighing rooms can feel a room beginning to be reweighed, and it made her move faster. Mrs. Yardley's pension was settled within the week, a cottage in Cornwall, and a date to leave. The valet was given his notice. The apothecary's bill was paid in full with a sum above it, and a word, and the apothecary, who had a daughter to dower, began to find that his memory of the late baronet's last weeks was not so clear as it had been. And the solicitor, who had not survived in his trade by leaving the smallest thing to chance, began to take an interest in the steward who was not a steward. He took it quietly. He wrote a letter to a man he knew in the Indies. He made inquiry, through channels a clever solicitor keeps oiled, into the name the steward went by, and found, as he had begun to suspect, that there was no such man, that the name was a coat thrown over a man, and that under the coat was the younger brother's son, the very heir the first will named. And so the solicitor understood, sooner than Stephen wished him to, exactly who was moving against him in the dark. He said nothing to the widow, yet he was the sort of man who liked to know a thing fully before he spent it. He set a footman, bought with a shilling and a promise, to watch where the steward went at night, and whom the governess sat with in the still-room. And he waited for the moment when knowing would be worth the most. The blow, when it came on the worst possible day, and it came because the solicitor had chosen the day. It was the reading of the inventory, a formal occasion, the house and its chattels to be valued before the estate passed wholly to the widow. The neighboring families invited, as was the custom, so that no later dispute might arise over what the great house had held. The drawing-room was full. The county was there, in its best mourning silk, the squires and their wives and the rector, and the 2 or 3 small gentry who orbited Caradon Place and lived on its goodwill. It was the public arena, the same chairs, the same fire, and into it the solicitor walked with his leather case and his quiet smile, and he did not open the inventory. He looked instead at Stephen standing in his plain dark coat at the side of the room, and he said in a voice pitched to carry to every silk gown and every starched cravat, "Before we proceed, I think the company should know that the man who has had the running of this estate these 11 months is not the honest steward he has represented himself to be. He came among us under a false name. He is an impostor, a fortune hunter who insinuated himself into a dying man's confidence, and has been creeping about the household at night, suborning servants, manufacturing a tale that he is the late baronet's heir. I have the proofs in this case. His name is not Maddox." He let the silence stretch. "I leave it to the company to judge what manner of man builds his claim on a lie about his very name." The room turned on Stephen all at once, the way the field of grass turns under the wind, and Tamsin saw the verdict fall upon him exactly as she had seen it fall upon herself in that corridor 2 years before. An impostor, a liar. The room redecided him in a breath, and there is no court in England slower to overturn its judgment than a roomful of one's neighbors who have just been told a clever lie they find more comfortable than the truth. This was the third voicing of the dismissal, and it was the cruelest, because it was true on its face and false underneath, and Stephen could not answer it without admitting the very deception that damned him. End quote. To say I am the heir was to say I came among you under a false name, which was the accusation itself. The solicitor had built a door that locked from both sides. Stephen stood very still, his jaw like carved stone. And Tamsin watched the cost of that stillness move once across his face, and she understood that he meant to take it. That he had reckoned the odds and found them lost, and that he was the kind of man who, finding them lost, would not drag the witnesses down with him by naming them, would not have misses. Yardley turned out without a character to add his ruin to her old age. He meant to take the blow alone and leave the house and let the lie stand. She did not decide to rise. She was simply, between one breath and the next, on her feet. He came under a false name, Tamsin said, into the held breath of the whole county. Because his uncle asked him to. Every silk gown turned. Lady Caradon's head came round slowly, and the governess, the respectable nobody kept for the child's French, stood in the center of the great drawing-room with her plain gray gown and her work-roughened hands, and her clear, ruled, carrying voice. And she did the one thing in all the world she knew how to do. She told the truth, in order, so that no one could mistake it. I read the first will aloud in this room, she said. Many of you were not present, so I will tell you what it said. It left Caradon Place to the late baronet's nephew, the son of the brother this house was taught to call dead. That nephew is not dead. He is in this room. Sir Bertram brought him here under the name of Maddox, to learn the estate he meant to leave him, and to learn the man before he trusted him with the people on it. And any of you who has watched how this estate has been run these 11 months may judge for yourselves whether the man failed that test. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Then a second will appeared, drawn by that gentleman by the window, dated the 3rd of October. I have read it. I know Sir Bertram's hand. I have 2 years of it, in the books he gave his ward and the wages he signed, with his own shaking fingers in his last September. By that date, he could not lift a cup. Mrs. Yardley fed him with her own hand, and will swear to it. The hand on that second will is the firm, bold, well hand of a man in good health. It is not the hand of a dying man. It is a hand that learned to copy a dying man, and copied him too well. The solicitor's smile did not move, but a muscle did, at the corner of it. The word of a governess, he said against a sealed instrument. The word of the one person in this room you yourselves chose because she could gain nothing, Tamsin said. You handed me the first will to read because I was disinterested. I am disinterested still. I have nothing to gain whether Caradon Place goes to the widow or the nephew or the king. I gain a turning out either way. For no great house keeps a governess who has spoken once above her station. I am telling you the truth because it is true, and because I read both wills with my own eyes, and because I will not stand in this room and watch an honest man named a liar by the one man here who has actually forged a name. She turned to the company, the squires and the rector and the small gentry, and she said the thing that could not be unsaid. You need not take my word. Send for the apothecary and ask him, on his honor, before all of you, whether Sir Bertram could have signed his name on the 3rd of October. Send for the valet before he has ships to York. Send for Mrs. Bawley. Yardley before she is pensioned to Cornwall this Lady Day, for I think you may ask yourselves why the only 3 people who tended Sir Bertram in his last weeks are all to be scattered to 3 corners of the kingdom before the quarter is out. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence before it. It was the silence of a room reweighing itself. The rector, an old man who had buried Sir Bertram and christened Araminta, and had no fortune to gain and a long memory besides, cleared his throat. I called upon Sir Bertram on the 2nd of October, he said slowly. He did not know me. He could not have signed his name. I would not have said so. Unasked, I will say so. Now being asked. And the floor, which the widow had felt shifting for weeks without knowing where, gave way all at once. Lady Caradon rose. The polished sentences were still in her. the hierarchy protective machinery that had served her all her life. And she reached for it. "This is an outrage. A servant has been suborned to slander my husband's last." The sentence did not hold, because the solicitor had already moved toward the door with his leather case held against his chest, and the whole county saw him move, saw the guilt in the haste of it, and the widow saw them see it, and the polished sentence fragmented in her mouth, and came apart. In quote. "She is nothing," she said. "She is the governess. She is nothing." 3 times she said it, the verdict she had always trusted, and 3 times it failed to move the room, because the room had decided to believe its own eyes at last. It was Stephen who stopped the solicitor. At the door, he did not raise a hand to him. He did not need to. He simply stood in the doorway where the firelight did not reach, the way he had stood at the very first reading, and he said, in a voice level as a ruled line, the one short sentence that ended it. "The case stays in this room." The solicitor stopped. A roomful of witnesses stood between him and the door, and the case under his arm held the second will, the forged thing itself, the proof of his own hand. And he understood, as a clever man understands a position lost, that to run with it now was to be seen running, and to be taken with it was worse. He set the case down upon the table, very slowly, beside the candle, and he said nothing more, because there was nothing left that would not hang him. What happened after happened in the slow procedural way that real justice happens, without spectacle, which is the only way the niche of the truth permits. The apothecary was sent for, and came and, freed by the rector's word and the company's eyes from the fee that had bought his silence, told what he knew. Mrs. Yardley was sent for and told how she had spooned broth between her master's lips when he could no longer lift the cup himself. The valet told of the shaking that could not hold a spoon. The second will, examined now by men who had no reason to wish it true, showed its forgery to any eye that cared to look, the firm bold name marching across a line no dying hand could have walked. The solicitor was a ruined man before the week was out, struck from his profession, gone from the county under a cloud he would carry, to whatever grave received him. He was not pursued with cruelty. He did not need to be. A man who has lost his name has lost the only thing his trade was built on. And Lady Caradon was not destroyed. That is not how the just and slow world of Caradon Place chose to mend itself. She was corrected. The estate was not hers, and had never been hers, and the law, once the witnesses had spoken, confirmed the first will in the nephew's right, and she found herself, who had weighed every room she ever entered, suddenly the lightest thing in the room she had thought she owned. Stephen Caradon, who was master now in truth and in name, did a thing his cousin had not deserved and could not have asked for. He let her keep the dower house, and a competence to live on, and the dignity of leaving Caradon Place in her own carriage, rather than being put out of it. It was not mercy she had earned. It was mercy he chose to give, because he had learned at the home farm and in the cottages and at his dying uncle's side that a man is measured by what he does with the power to ruin someone, and he would not begin his mastery by becoming the thing he had come to set right. She paused at the door of the great drawing-room as she left it, the widow, in her black bombazine and her heavy rings, and she looked for a long moment at the governess who had unmade her, and something passed across her face that was not hatred. It was the slow, late, unwilling recognition of a person whose categories had failed her, who had measured a woman by the only scale she owned, and had been wrong about the weight. She did not apologize. She inclined her head a fraction, the smallest motion, the kind a person makes when they have understood a thing too late to use it, and then she was gone, and the carriage took her down the long drive in the gray afternoon light, and the matter was closed. The house was very quiet after. Stephen found Tamsin in the schoolroom where she had gone because she did not know where else in the house she now belonged. She had unmade a great lady and saved a true heir, and she was still, in the cold arithmetic of a great house, a governess who had spoken above her station, and she had told the county herself that she expected to be turned out for it. She was folding the child's French primer closed, when he came in, and her work-roughened hands were not quite steady, and she did not look up, because she had spent 2 years learning not to want things she could not have, and she would not let him see her wanting now. He stood in the doorway a moment where the late light came in gold across the worn floor. Then he crossed the room, which a steward would not have done, and a master might, and he stopped before her at a proper and improper distance, close enough that she had to look up, and she looked up. "You said you would be turned out either way," he said, "whether the house went to the widow, or to the nephew, or to the king." "A house does not keep a governess who has spoken so," she said. "I knew it when I stood. I would do it again." "I know you would," he said. "That is the whole of why I am asking." He was quiet a moment, and the slate-gray eyes that gave nothing away gave something away at last, the door in them opening all the way. "I have spent 11 months learning every name on this land, because my uncle wished to know whether I could be trusted with the people on it. I learned them all. And in 11 months I never once heard, in any cottage or any field, the name of the one person in this house who could not be bought and could not be frightened, and would stand up in a roomful of her betters and tell the truth at the cost of everything she had. I had to find her myself on the worst day when she stood up. To save a man she owed nothing." He drew a breath. "Tamsin!" It was the first time he had used her given name. It fell into the quiet schoolroom like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting 2 years to be opened, and she felt it in the place behind her ribs where she had folded her whole history small. "I am not asking you to stay as the child's governess," he said. "I am asking you to be mistress of a house that owes its master to your clear voice. I am asking because in all this county you are the one person I have met whose worth no one could measure but me, and I find I would rather measure it every morning of my life than lose the chance of it. Stay. Not because you have nowhere to go, because I am asking, and because I think if you are honest with me as you were honest with that room, you do not wish to go." She was honest with him. She had been honest at the cost of everything, and she found she had no false coin left to spend, not even the safe false coin of refusal. "No," she said, "I do not wish to go." He took her work-roughened hand in his, and he did not kiss it as a gentleman kisses a lady's gloved hand at a ball, formally, and at a distance. He turned it over and looked at the calluses the governess years had set into the palm of a parson's daughter, and he closed his hand around them as though they were the most valuable thing in the house. And perhaps, in that house, on that day, they were. If Tamsin's clear voice in that crowded room moved you, stay a moment more, for the story does not end at the asking. It ends, as the best of them do, in the quiet after. They were married in the spring, in the old church, where the rector who had spoken the truth now spoke the right, with no great county wedding and no display, because neither of them had ever trusted display. The child stood beside Tamsin in a new gown, and held a bunch of elderflowers for Mrs. Yardley's still-room, for Mrs. Yardley was not pensioned to Cornwall after all, but kept on as housekeeper to the end of her days, and the valet was not shipped to York, and the apothecary's daughter was dowered out of an estate that could now afford to be kind because it was, at last, in the hands of a man who had learned every name on it. By Christmas of that year there was firelight in the long gallery and snow against the windows, and Tamsin walked the gallery one evening with her husband, past the portraits of the Caradons who had turned a brother out on a lie, and she stopped, as she had stopped once before, in front of the portrait of the estranged younger brother. The dead one who had not died, Stephen's father, who had gone to the Indies and worked and come home in his son. She had come upon Stephen before this very portrait once, in the first weeks, and seen on his guarded face an expression she had no name for, and she had a name for it now. It was the look of someone who had carried his father's vindication a long way home, and did not yet know whether he would be allowed to set it down. He had set it down. The house was his, and his father's name was clean in it, and the truth had been read aloud in the very room where the lie had been told, by a clear voice that owed the listener the dignity of not being deceived. Tamsin reached up and touched the frame of the portrait, the way an honest life comes back round at the last to a small physical thing, and she felt under her fingers the cold gilt And beyond the window, the snow coming down on the land that knew her now by name. She had come to Caradon Place, a respectable nobody kept for the child's French, weighed once and dismissed by a woman who could not see her. She had read a dead man's will aloud because she was the one person who did not matter. And the room they had filled with her clear voice had turned on itself, exactly as the wrong of it deserved. And out of the turning, the truth had come standing. And so had she. The fire ticked down in the great grate. Somewhere 2 floors above, the clock that ran 4 minutes fast ran on, ahead of everything, the way it always had. And her husband's hand was warm over the calluses 2 years of service had set into her palm, and the snow kept falling. Soft and steady and without any verdict at all, upon a house that had finally been told the truth and had, at the last, believed it.